Since 9/11, more than 2.5 million Americans have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other theaters in the war on terror. Most have returned to resume normal lives, but for some, the war continues at home. They're grappling with severe physical or psychological injuries that complicate their adjustment to civilian life, and a small number have landed in the criminal justice system. We're still learning how to help returning vets deal with the trauma of combat. That's a challenge high on the agenda of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where we're proud to host more former service members in the student body than any other CUNY school, some 560 last semester. So it's not surprising that John Jay has developed one of the nation's most remarkable programs for returning vets who need help. It uses a stunningly simple tool: water. Just 3 years ago, Jonathan Martinez was told he'd never walk again by an Army medic. He was serving in Paktika province in eastern Afghanistan when he was caught in a mortar attack and fractured his vertebrae in 3 places.
That's when I took the round in my elbow, and I took a round on my right thigh, and shrapnel around my up my back. When he told me that I won't be able to walk on my left leg again, I freaked out. My life was physical activity, you know, sports, military. After going through 3 doctors, the 4th one finally told me, it was like, if you work hard at it, you can walk again. And here I am. You know, I worked hard at it.
By the time he entered John Jay as an undergrad, a program of therapy had returned the use of his limbs. He had already begun working as a veterans advocate in the Midtown Community Court on West 54th Street to help traumatized comrades who found themselves in trouble with the law. But he knew he still needed help to overcome the feelings of anxiety and alienation that were hampering his return to civilian life. That's when he met John Jay's Dr. Jane Katz. Dr. Katz has won national recognition for her water fitness programs for New York City cops and firefighters. In 2012, she launched a program called Wets for Vets to extend the use of swimming therapy to vets at John Jay. We're honored to have Dr. Katz with us on Criminal Justice Matters. Dr. Katz, welcome.
Thank you.
So as if you didn't have already enough to do at John Jay, you began the Wets for Vets program. What made you do that?
The main reason is because my late husband had just passed away, and he was a veteran. My father passed away a few, times before he was a veteran.
Serving
and
where? Where did they serve?
My late husband was an Army captain in Iceland many, many, many years ago. My father was in the Merchant Marine in France. And I was born, right about that time. Mm-hmm. So it's very special to me. And today, after 50 years of being at CUNY, more and more veterans have returned to John Jay College. And for the past 25 years, the numbers have just grown from single to double to triple digits. And that is part of it. So in 2012, I decided to start a program for veterans called Wets for Vets. Wets meaning water exercise techniques, which we have as a class for fun, for fitness, to meet your buddy that's backs you up.
So it was a networking thing as it started, and then as well as sort of fitness therapy. What does that mean, fitness therapy?
It's spiritual, emotional, and it is holistic. And so that it's not only the exercise, it's the mind, body, spirit that gets people to meet other people, especially in school, in civilian life, where most students are worried about their exams. And I have found that many of the veterans coming in were more worried about their courses and their absences than protecting our freedom far away. And therefore, the civilian students and our veterans are together. We meet each other.
So that's interesting. So it's a two-phase program. In a sense, it brings students who haven't had experience in the military together with fellow students who have, and obviously, as you know, most of our civilian society has very, very little, if any, experience with military matters.
Exactly.
So that's a plus, I would guess.
Definitely, because at school it's busy. You don't know anyone, and unless you've managed to meet someone by chance, perhaps, not anymore, because we have a fantastic veterans program here at.
But what's the spiritual part of it? I mean, what is it about water that helps people adjust or deal with the traumas they've experienced in combat?
Yes, well, it's water in all its forms. Most of our bodies are water. The world is water. If they're afraid to swim, it's getting over the fear if they've had a bad experience in water, whether you're a civilian or a veteran. And that's what I've spent most of my life helping to people overcome. And you have to have your back. And that buddy system is what, both in civilian life and especially on the field.
Are there other lessons that are different that you apply to returning vets than, say, you would apply to the programs you have for New York cops and firefighters?
It is similar, but the trust is even more. We have this fantastic example of Jonathan, who has joined our class as a swimmer and has helped others. And they tell the story, and I make everyone meet each other so that when we exercise, they change buddies and they get to meet each other.
Let's talk about the trust part of it a little bit. Now, in the service, trust is a big part
Major.
of surviving. You have to
Number
trust
one.
your buddies. How does that translate into the pool?
Well, sometimes people think, well, I can swim, I don't have to help my buddy, or they can swim. You're always there, got your back, and that is key. As an example, if you're floating on your back and learning to float, you're physically behind your buddy, supporting that person until they recover to a standing position, because if you haven't learned it before, that's the X factor.
Well, we know Jonathan is one of the success stories that you've had. He's
Fantastic.
been a huge help in your program. Tell us some others. Can you give us some more examples of,
Sure.
of vets who've come back? And we're talking about men and women, right? We're not just
Yes,
talking about men.
yes. Mark McNaughton, who was our first leader, who had a very hard time adjusting to school, to getting into law school, and to meeting other people. And then there was Chris Rodriguez, who is a very good athlete, who are now the best of buddies and the best of friends. He's in law school. Chris is doing great at school. And the socialization that they're like, you know, best buddies.
So here's the secret. Does water therapy get you better marks?
It doesn't hurt.
Now, why isn't that more places around the country aren't using this water fitness program? All you need is a pool and some committed people to do it. Is it
I
money
think the
or is it
support,
inspiration?
thank you. It's the money, it's the exposure, it's that it is priceless. The buoyancy of the water helps people like Jonathan and other people to recover and go on with their life, because that is the key. And sometimes you're not going to play football again, but you can swim.
It's just a place where I can go and it's like a safe place. I go in, I clear my mind from everything, and nothing else matters.
I hope people take a look at this and say, we have to do this. We have to do more of this.
Well, I hope so, and I thank you very much. And you know what? Vets for Vets is there, so we know who we are. We've been ready for Rio for a couple of seasons now that it's over, and we will definitely continue our quest.
Jane, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This is for you.
Thank you. John Jay's West for Vets doesn't promise miracles. It's only one part of the college's efforts to help its student population of returning service members. To help us explore the tough challenges vets at John Jay and elsewhere face, Jonathan Martinez joins us along with Richard Pusateri, the former Marine Corps Senior Forces Chaplain, who now heads John Jay's Military and Veteran Services Program. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Jonathan, let's start with you.
Okay.
Particularly before you got to John Jay, you were working at the Midtown Court as a veterans advocate. Why do we need veterans courts? Aren't our regular courts good enough when vets do get in trouble with the law?
Yes, they do work. However, when you look at veterans in the criminal justice system, you see the patterns of the reasons why they're getting in trouble. When you specialize a court for like a veterans court where, you know, primary focus is trauma and primary focus is actually helping the veterans with benefits and stuff like that, you can deter them, you can help them keep away from a life of crime. So some of the patterns we saw was homelessness, some of the patterns we saw was unemployment, some of the patterns we saw was trauma with mental health. So when you take all these factors together and not, you don't, acknowledge those factors separately from the reasons why they're out on the streets, the reasons why they're in crime, and you track it back to the transitional period from when they first separated the military. And if we target that right there from that point, that's when we can actually help veterans.
I know that the first veterans court in the country actually was started in Buffalo in 2008.
Correct.
And they've been remarkably successful, but the critics say, well, I mean, isn't that giving special privilege to veterans? After all, if they've broken the law, why do they need some special consideration?
It's not special consideration when you look at the trauma, and it's the same concept if you're going to starting drug courts. It's the same concept of starting family courts. It's the vulnerable population that we have to focus on when it comes to these issues. So if you have a veteran opposed to a regular person committing the same crime, the reasons could be very different in a sense where a civilian can be targeted right then and there in the regular courts where the veteran might need more treatment in a sense of mental health counseling and things like that.
Well, I want to come back to that in a second, but Richard, when we talk about trauma that veterans experience on coming back from a combat theater, I mean, is it any different from the trauma you would get in a catastrophe or a disaster or as a victim of crime? I mean, is there something special that we need to think about when we talk to combat vets in particular?
I think the distinction has a lot to do with just the difference in context. When you come back, you're making a massive shift in context. So it's always similar trauma, but you're coming from such a different place that just sort of reality testing, adjusting to where you are, adjusting to different settings and expectations and mores, there's massive change, and that's probably the biggest difference. The basic, trauma stress is sort of the same for everybody, but the context is so massive because it's not something that happened in Brooklyn, it's something that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia, and that just adds to the adjustment and sort of just a basic confusion. Suddenly, your whole view of the world, your immediate peer group, everything has changed.
So we have lots of vets at CUNY right
Yes.
now, and thankfully we have special programs for them to help them financially with counseling as they need it. But is there some special issues at John Jay or at CUNY schools that vets need to experience? Or, I mean, obviously they're here, which is a great triumph to have made it here after being in combat. They were in school. But where do you go from there?
I think the first is, and Jonathan's certainly done it, it's just getting yourself seriously committed to higher education. It's such a different world. The people you're in, the way people talk and all that, and to just commit and say, I really need to take this seriously. I really need to see this as a path to my future. And then the other is to actually fit it to you. Sort of that mix between you come with a lot of maturity, a lot of serious experience.
You're a more serious student.
But it's spoken very differently than what you're going to talk about at even John Jay. So how do you make sort of that mental and personal transition? I am a mature experience. I've done leadership things. I've done difficult things. How do I make this part of me and part of my education? That's part of the reason peer things work real well, because it isn't a program, Absolutely. But when veterans get together, they start imagining the ways to take, their military experience and their military Military does a great job making us military. That's really who we are. In 4 years, you're really that guy.
And then you have to step back.
And then, how do I fit this into this civilian student path to success kind of me now?
Jonathan, how did you find that transition back? I mean, you were an undergrad at John Jay before you went into the service, if I recall, and then you left for economic reasons, and then what made you decide to come back, and what was different about coming back this time than when you were at school the first time?
So the first time around, back in 2008, I wasn't as serious in college as I was now.
You were a 20-year-old.
I was 18 years old,
yeah.
and I wasn't, right out of high school, just college was one of those things where, like, oh, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. And coming back from the military, changing my perspective completely changed from college. This is things I've already done in the military. These are things that I mastered in the military as a soldier. I can take this, put it towards my schooling, and master school.
I assume there was discipline and character as well.
Absolutely.
You didn't have when you were an 18-year-old and you had now.
Absolutely, and that was one of the biggest transitions back in school when I first came back in 2013. And it was a matter of when I sat down in class, I felt isolated. I was the older student in class. I was, everyone was talking to each other, making a lot of noise, and it frustrated me because if that happened in the middle of a brief, you would be outside, be taken care of in a sense.
Did your fellow students get where you came from, or were they feeling, who is this guy? I mean, is he going to be bragging about?
That's what I felt a lot when I first came back. Was when topics of military in class or something like that would come up, I was like, well, I am a veteran and this is what I've experienced in this situation. You feel like you get that look as like, who is this guy? Like, who does he think he is in this class right now? And it was tough, making that transition. But it took a little bit to realize, like, I'm here for my education. I'm here to study for me and to better myself. And if you're not going to take it as serious as I am, I'm going to take it serious and keep it moving, But
the big difference with you is that you were injured, you nearly died. And you obviously had stress and trauma as a result of that, which brought you into the West for Vets program. But how did that affect your studies and your approach to schooling?
It was tough. Like I said, my first semester back, I didn't get A's across the board. It was tough with that transition, trying to readequate to schooling. And just being in that culture, being in the school environment. The next following semester, I kind of like took a few days and just like went away to really think about like what are the goals that I want. And after those 3-4 days of just refreshing my mind, it was just, this is what I need to do.
Everything I've read about post traumatic stress syndrome and also about vets returning from combat is that you get this mix of feelings. You're lonely, you're alienated, you're anxious, and you have this incredible anger. I mean, that seems to be a sort of a grade of emotions that sometimes you can't control. I mean, have you found that yourself when you've dealt, Dick, with traumatic or post-traumatic injuries, psychologically and physical, throughout your career? Have you found that we know a little bit more about why that happens and how we can deal with it?
Well, it is a trauma response. It's also a continuum. When you describe those things, everybody feels those things. It's sort of how far it went with you. That's why, PTSD is a diagnosis and it's a checklist. But does everybody feel some of that? I mean, everybody who came back from the war zone was sort of mad and sort of shocked that the rest of the world just went on. Everybody had to adjust to sleeping and being around people who smelled good and all those kind of good things. And it's just it's the continuum. If you think of goes up, comes down, we're really looking at what brings you back to normal life. I mean, and how fast, what it aids in that, those type of things.
Can you control it? I mean, very often, sometimes people will come back immediately and say, well, I'm fine, I'm totally normal. Then 5 years later or 10 years later, then things kick in. Is that something that you've seen happen?
Well, that happens, and it doesn't have to happen. Part of it is just the persistence of memories. Really significant things in your life don't go away. But the other is sometimes just submerging it. If somebody just, denial is sort of a cliche word, but if someone just swallowed it and said, I'm ignoring this, I'm just, I'll take care of it on my own, I'll never talk about it, I'll never think about it. Those are the folks, sort of the classic that years later are still wrestling with it and finding it alive because they've never really looked at it. They've never really dealt with it. So a lot of encouragement in the military, in the VA, and just in regular life to sort of find a safe place to work through those thoughts.
If you've come to college, if you made it to John Jay or other community schools or anywhere else, I mean, you're already halfway there, right? I mean, you've already made some decisions.
It's incredibly positive. I mean, it's no guarantee, but it does mean your life's going on.
Absolutely.
If you can stick in college, I mean, in all honesty, and when Jonathan and I talked about the treatment court, part of that is, particularly the young veterans, great risk. If you hit them, there's no recidivism. You're just trying to set them back on their life. And college is a great vehicle to get people to find a life again and a purpose and, you know, vocations.
But for those who aren't in college and who haven't
Yeah.
made it there, then it becomes a further uphill challenge, I mean, I assume.
Yeah, they have to find something.
Let's tell you, there's one particular aspect of return to civilian life that is often talked about, which is the relationships that vets make or can't make, you know, with loved ones. You see a lot of issues that come into court, domestic abuse issues. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, have you seen that? Have you seen issues in relationships that you've had or with the vets that you work with? And how do you deal with them? And how do we as a society handle those?
I've actually seen a lot of that within coming right back from Afghanistan, coming home and, you know, having my buddies' wives call me because they're in a brawl or something, you know, and it was hard because, like, I understood why he was upset, but it was like he just, you know, they just take it too far and he just couldn't control himself in a sense. But it's no excuse, you know, 100% is no excuse for it. But it's just, I've seen a lot with veterans, especially in the court system also, who balled it up, and when they finally let it go, it's just like that anger, everything they just been balling up so much is just lets go, and they can't control themselves.
They take it out on their families.
And they take it out on their families because those are the easiest targets in a sense. You know, like they're under the same roofs all the time, and it's sad because it's like the help is there, the help is out there. It's just a matter of reaching out and admitting, you know, and really, you know, accepting that you need the help.
Because the other part of the equation, maybe the most important part, is, I mean, since the number of people who served in the military and served in combat theaters is a relatively small proportion of Americans today. I mean, we haven't been in a world war, thank God, but, you know, we are still, you know, what's happening in the military is still walled off very much from our society. So civilian society doesn't really understand what you've gone through, Jonathan, and your buddies who've gone through. But what role do we play in civilian life in dealing with folks who come back, and what role should we play? I mean, for each of you, what would you advise that we can do better in terms of dealing with this kind of stress? Just very briefly.
I mean, one main thing for me would be a support, you know, the support network, you know, just family members, friends, just be there on the side, just, you know, with a distance in a sense, you know, just, as long as you show the support, it's like, we're here for you. You know, they'll just take it as they take it.
And institutionally, Richard?
Yeah, I think part of it is the recognition you have veterans and they have a significant and other experience. I think the other thing, though, for institutions, people at large, is also to make sure, you know, don't let the outside define veterans. Talk to them. Don't take stereotypes. Don't assume you know where Jonathan's been and how Jonathan feels. Ask him. If you're trying to reach out to veterans, a lot of different people, a lot of different experiences, and I think the one thing is sometimes we're acting on stereotypes that aren't correct. We're responding to problems they don't have, where they have other challenges. So again, I think, you know, just being in dialogue with these very real Americans and fellow citizens and people you're together with at the college, and just ask them where they are, what they need, how they feel about things. And sometimes, amazingly, we don't do that. We work on assumptions that are wrong. So that's one thing that, you know, I really encourage here, and I think we're trying to do here.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you. And when you come home and you can't find, you don't have those bonds, you don't have those brothers, you lose your self-identity, and you look for it in other places. And when I found West for Vets, that's what I found here: a new self-identity, a new belonging, and a new purpose.
Most observers say today's returning combat vets are luckier than the men and women who served in our previous wars. Improved medical care has saved lives that might have been lost otherwise. And we know a lot more about how to help those suffering from PTSD. But it's all relative. For each veteran navigating a path back to civilian life, it remains a private and often lonely battle. Counseling, job incentives, and innovative programs like West for Vets are an important start. But we can do a lot more to help them win that battle. For one thing, we need to keep up the pressure on the New York City Council's efforts to improve veteran services. And when you meet one of our vets, don't forget to thank them for their service. I'm Steve Handelman. Thanks for watching. See you next time.